So interestingly, the framework elements that we've looked at so far aren't actually controls at all. In the class hierarchy for controls, they're actually a more basic element than control. In fact, the control type derives from framework element. Now the thing that makes a control is actually just one property, and that's the template property. Now we're going to cover the template property in detail in a later chapter. But the basic idea behind a template is the concept that you get to specify exactly what the control looks like. With the elements that we've covered so far, they didn't need to be controls, and the reason for that is that the visual appearance of each of those was determined directly by the content. Now in practice, there aren't actually that many controls that are just plain controls. In fact, the only one that I could think of that we use regularly was Grid Splitter. So if you open up the controls folder, you'll see that we have one sample in here, and that's Grid Splitter. Now you can open that up in XAMLpad, and we can maximize that, and open up the text area. And now you can see in here another example of the Grid Splitter. Now to be honest, this is something that should be familiar to you by now, so we won't spend a lot of time going through this markup. But it is another example, and it's good to know that Grid Splitter is actually a control. So let's close out of this. And now let's go back to our control samples folder, and we'll take a look at another class of controls called content controls. Alright, so if you open up the content controls folder, you can see a number of examples of content controls in here. Now the thing that makes a content control unique, and actually makes it a content control, is the introduction of a property called content. Now if we open up buttons.xaml, you can see a number of examples of buttons, and it turns out that buttons are actually content controls. So let's maximize this window, and then open up the text area, and finally we'll turn off auto parsing. And now let's take a look at these different types of buttons. Alright, so let me make the text just a little bit bigger here so you can see what's going on. Alright, so you can see that we've got a number of different types of buttons here, and the first thing I wanted to do is walk you through these different buttons. So the first of these is just a regular button, and it behaves just like any Windows button. You can click on it. It also has a hover and a resting state. The second of these looks just like a button, but it's actually a special type of button called a toggle button. And the thing that makes a toggle button is the fact that it toggles. In other words, when you click it, it stays down, and then if you click it again, it comes back up. The third button is a special button called a repeat button, and to the user this looks just like a normal button, but the thing that makes it unique is that it continually fires click events as long as the user is holding the button down. And then two other examples that actually derive from button are checkbox and radio button. Now the thing that all of these things have in common is the fact that they're content controls, and the great thing about being a content control is that you have a content property. And that content can actually be very rich. In fact, sometimes we refer to it as rich content. And I'll show you some more examples of that in just a minute. But the thing to understand is that literally any WPF element can go inside of the button. That means that you could replace the text "click me" with everything from another button to any control to even something crazy like a video. So let's go ahead and close out of this.